when a weapons CEO joked on NPR, as I heard him do prior to the attack on Libya, that if the occupation of Afghanistan had to end, he hoped there could be a big, long occupation of Libya, nobody demanded his resignation. But if you step outside of our culture for a moment in your mind, and you think, why is it okay to joke about mass murder for profit? Why is it acceptable for Congress members to talk about militarism as a jobs program? Why did a congressman publicly say he was voting against Iraq war funding because his brother died in Vietnam, and not because 4 million people died in Vietnam and 1 million in Iraq, and mass murder is the responsibility of each and every one of us because no man is an island? When you ask those questions, then the Donald Sterling's everybody's doing it defense looks shameful, even about something that everybody's really still doing. Not everybody is buying the lies. The lies aren't working well enough to sell any war, but they are working well enough to keep alive the idea that there might be a good war someday. Ridding ourselves of that idea is a matter of survival at this point. Or in the words of George W. Bush, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me, can't get fooled again. Polling for war support is not just low on Ukraine. It's very similar on U.S. desire for a war with Iran, for U.S. military involvement in Syria. Many more Americans believe in ghosts and UFOs, according to the polls, than believe those would be good wars. The U.S. public never got behind the war in Libya, and for years a majority has said that the wars on Iraq and Afghanistan never should have been launched. This search for a good war is looking as futile as the search for the mythical city of El Dorado, and yet the search remains our top public project. The U.S. military takes 55.2% of federal discretionary spending. Televised U.S. sporting events thank members of the military for watching from 175 nations. U.S. aircraft carriers patrol the world's seas. U.S. drones buzz the skies of nations thousands of miles from our own. No other nation spends remotely comparable funds on militarism, and much of what the United States buys has no defensive purpose unless defense is turned into meaning deterrence or preemption or, in fact, aggression. As the world's #1 supplier of weapons to other nations, ours may be said to extend its search for a good war beyond our own affairs as well. A 2006 National Intelligence estimate found U.S. wars were generating anti-U.S. sentiment. Former military officials, including Stanley McChrystal, say drone strikes are producing far more enemies than they are killing. A Gallup poll of 65 nations at the end of 2003 found, guess which nation most widely believed no other anywhere close is the greatest threat to peace in the world? The U.S. The global copism is not appreciated by the globe. When I lived near Vicenza, Italy, pre-9/11, people tended to like Americans despite the local army base. Now that they've built an enormous new base against overwhelming local opposition, feelings are not quite as friendly. People who tried to stop the base just posted a video online of themselves cutting a fence, going in, and planting marijuana seeds everywhere. Set to music. You should watch this on YouTube. Set to music. Tim Carpenter always used to talk about healthcare, not warfare, and had his priorities exactly right. But we spend twice per capita what any other nation spends on healthcare, and we get worse healthcare as a result of how we spend it. We spend several times what any other nation spends on war and war preparation, and we get a lower level of safety because of how we spend it. Canadians don't go without health care, and there are no anti-Canadian terrorist networks. It's the country that routinely bombs people in the name of fighting terrorism that is generating the terrorism. It is the ethics of a coward to believe that safety justifies anything, but it is the ethics of a fool to commit immoral acts that actually endanger us. And what is more immoral than modern wars, with the deaths and injuries so massive, so one-sided, and so heavily civilian? Military spending produces fewer jobs than spending on education or infrastructure or even tax cuts for working people. It is the ethics of a sociopath to justify killing for economic gain, but of a fool to do so for economic loss. The military is our top consumer of petroleum and creator of Superfund sites, in addition to being the hole into which we sink the funds that could address a real danger, like the climate. War justifies secrecy, the erosion of our liberties, warrantless surveillance, imprisonment, torture, assassination, even as the wars are marketed as defending freedom. Did you see the report last week that Haji Gulabai, Afghanistan's torturer-in-chief, over a period of several years of the U.S. occupation, is now living in a 2-story pink house in a suburb of Los Angeles, having brought a dozen relatives with him and not bothered to learn English and remaining unemployed? Sounds a lot like George W. Bush. Both should be prosecuted, as should Condoleezza Rice, who has just been stopped from speaking at Rutgers graduation by student protests. Another thing keeping war around does is keep weapons around that could destroy the planet. Maintenance of nuclear and other weapons for war risks intentional or accidental catastrophe. The downsides to war, even for an aggressor nation with overwhelming firepower, are voluminous. The upside seems to be that if we keep fighting wars, one of them someday might turn out to be a good one. But here's the thing, we don't need a good one. We have the knowledge and the resources to avoid conflicts, to resolve conflicts nonviolently, and to resist violence nonviolently more effectively than it can be resisted using violence. It would cost about $30 billion per year to end starvation and hunger on Earth. It would cost about $11 billion to give the world clean drinking water. Round it up to $50 billion for food and water. That's 5% of the roughly $1 trillion the U.S. wastes every year on militarism. Foreign aid is now $23 billion. It would cost very little to make the United States the most beloved rather than the most feared nation on Earth. And refraining from war-making would cost nothing, on the contrary, save a fortune that could be spent at home and abroad. Spending a bit of it on useful projects would save many times the lives that would be spared from not taking them away with war. What if we invested in peace education, nonviolent activist training, conflict negotiation, human shields and nonviolent peace teams, aid, diplomacy, the rule of law, and sustainable energy? To hear President Obama talk, you'd think we were already headed that way and the world was outraged by it. Quote, typically, Obama said last week, criticism of our foreign policy has been directed at the failure to use military force, end quote. Really? That's why people rank the United States as the greatest threat to peace in the world. Of course, by critics, Obama means corporate television and right-wing warmongers and Republicans. Perhaps he even means his own Republican Secretary of so-called Defense, Chuck Hagel, who just made this comment in support of incredible levels of military spending. Quote, we want our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines active around the world, deploying with greater frequency and agility with the skills and expertise needed to build security capacity in each region. Really, who's we? I want to close with a few things you can do before taking questions. There are sign-up cards that I would love it if could be passed around, and they're also on the table with books outside, that are for worldbeyondwar.org. They have a survey question at the top that it would be very, very helpful if everyone could answer yes or no. Then there's a short statement to sign if you agree with it. Thousands of people in at least 57 nations so far have signed this. And this is how we are trying to build an international pivot to peace instead of a pivot to war in Asia. Then there are places to check if you'd like to join and help out in any way. You can also start planning, and maybe some of you already are, for an event on August 27th, 1928. And if you don't know what that means, ask me in the question period or read my books. And on September 21st, the International Day of Peace, when events are happening all over the world. Join an existing event or create one and go to worldbeyondwar.org and we'll help promote it. And start planning for October 4th, which will be a global day of action against drones. Connecticut has established a commission to work on shifting from a war economy to a peace economy. Los Angeles should do the same. California should do the same. Other things you can tell Congress, and you can come to rootsaction.org where I work and sign petitions and take email actions. repeal the authorizations for the use of military force on Afghanistan and Iraq, which is supposedly over now. Yesterday they started talking about sending U.S. troops back in. Second, end the occupation of Afghanistan. Third, end the drone murders. Fourth, disband NATO. And I would add, out of the millions of other things you might tell Congress, do not put troops back in the Philippines. Do not build a Navy base on Jeju Island, South Korea. Do not build a new Marine base in Okinawa, Japan. Thank you very, very much for being here.